what comes to my mind and what came to my mind early on when you were talking about that the government didn't need to put stigma and taboo on the UAP issue. My question is, I agree that from our where we sit, you and I, Lou, our perspective, it's irritating that the government put stigma and taboo explicitly. Like now there's this statement saying like we actually made fun of people on like they're from the Air Force saying like we actually made fun of people who researched this and tried to drive that one guy crazy
There was an
multiple.
actual campaign to do that, to
Yeah,
discredit people
yeah,
actively, while on the
right.
other hand, you have them secretly doing the research themselves.
Right. But you had said that the government didn't need to. But I would say, as much as I think from our point of view now, it feels like the government didn't need to. My guess is they felt like they needed to as a protective move. Like
No,
they
no,
felt like it was
certainly,
a protective move.
certainly they did, and I understand why. I just don't agree with the reasons why. No, absolutely. Look, there are reasons why government keeps things secret. One of those is to keep information out of the hands of our adversaries.
Yeah.
Another one is to keep information out of the hands of our politicians so they don't start interfering and mucking around in certain programs that we have. And the other reason is to keep information hidden from the American people. And if people don't think that happens, look, I'll be very, very, very frank. Governments only work because the people have invested a good degree of confidence in those institutions and organizations to represent the will of the people, to protect the interests of the people. When people begin to realize a government can't do that, then people start losing faith and confidence, right? And so let's look at, for example, the development of the U-2 spy plane at the time with, I'm sure our friend here can talk to about, Carmen can talk about that, but you had a requirement from the CIA, which then led to the development and building in a very short period of time, the U-2 spy plane by Lockheed Skunk Works. And the idea was to build a plane in contravention of an existing treaty we had with Russia at the time that we would not fly manned reconnaissance missions over mainland Russia. And so what did we do? We built a spy plane that could fly higher and faster than anything anyone had ever seen before. And for the first few flights, we thought we succeeded. Why? Because as we flew over mainland Russia, they didn't respond. So clearly our plane was invisible. It could do exactly what we hoped it to do. The reality is that it wasn't until the Russians developed the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shot one down did they, and parade, of course, Captain Powers and the wreckage of the U-2 in front of the United Nations and the world, did they ever admit to the world that they had been tracking every one of our flights since the beginning. They didn't even admit it to the Russian people. And why? Because you don't admit a problem for which there is no solution. And at this particular point in time, back in the 70s and the 60s, with all these UAP going on, there wasn't a solution. We didn't even understand the technology or the physics. And so, to inform the American people the reality of these things was a problem. Look, I'll give you another perfect example. When we first discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, the scientific community, not we, the scientific community, first discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, it took them years before they released the translation of those sea scrolls. Now, why is that? Because we were afraid it was going to contradict the notion at the time, the current notion of the Judeo Christian religion. We did not want to upset the apple cart. And so, therein lies part of the problem. And so, as an organization, as an institution, as a government, when you spend 70 years building up this active campaign to discredit a topic, and now comes the time where you have to be truthful. That is a very tangled ball of yarn that you have spent
Yep. Yep.
decades
Yep.
putting together, and now you have to detangle it in a way where you can save some face. And I understand it's a difficult situation, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm not trying to out my government. I'm not trying to hurt my government. I'm trying to help my government. I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to help the government. It's now at the point where this is the worst kept secret. Other foreign adversaries have their own UFO programs. That's a fact. They've admitted it. So we're behind the eight ball here. And if we really care about our country, we would start telling the truth now about this topic so we can start moving forward with the scientific, the academic communities, even the philosophical communities, the defense communities, the intelligence community. This is something that it should be kind of an all hands on deck thing. And quite frankly, I don't think, there's aspects of this conversation that certainly fall within the I think, the silo of national security. And from that perspective, I do want a 3 or 4 star general making a recommendation on, hey, How do we stop incursions into controlled U.S. airspace or interfering with our nuclear equities? But there's a huge part of this conversation that is so much bigger than that. And it involves every single human being, as I've said before, equally and yet differently, depending on the way you were raised and your culture and your religious background. And this conversation affects all of us from a from a psychological perspective, from a sociological perspective, from a philosophical perspective, from a theological perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I am not, no, I'm not comfortable with a 3 or 4 star general telling me how to consider this topic from those other areas. They're
Right.
simply not qualified.
Well, and it's not
Um,
their
So
job. It's not, and then it's not their
it's simply
mandate.
not their job.